Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see all your shining faces out in the comments tonight. I'm your host, Chris Stodinger, and I will be your guide for this exciting evening through the architects of Tacoma, the men and women who have dreamed this great city. I gotta start by saying one of my favorite things about these tours now is just seeing the chatter beforehand. I feel like there's a community. Like, people talk about stuff from last week, like nothing to do with the tours, just stuff that they've been chatting about. It's like a hangout for people now. So if nothing else, I am proud of this moment. Let's make sure that everyone can hear me loud and clear tonight. No issues with the audio. I think we're doing pretty well. I remembered to turn on the microphone this time, so that's at least a plus. And hey, City of Soap Lake. Oh man, my people are from Eastern Washington, and Soap Lake is near and dear to my heart. I actually have quite a bit of affection for the whole coolies of Eastern Washington, but I don't want to digress too much tonight. So good to see you all. Welcome on board. So I should start with general housekeeping and a few disclosures for this whole thing. Remember probably last week when I mentioned that my greatest failing as a guide is botany. Like, I don't really know plants as well as I should. I would say a close second is architectural styles. Because while I'm intensely curious, neoclassic, Beaux Art, Art Deco, Gothic Revival, it gets muddied for me. And I find that those who are well versed in architecture are kind of like sommeliers, people who know a lot about wine. Like, they're so intensely intelligent in understanding their art and so incredibly handicapped in describing it to people who haven't gone through training. That's a personal thought of mine. It's not the official stance of Pretty Gritty Tours, but I don't think sommeliers and architects are the best at communicating. Not their fault. Maybe it's just something in their classical training. So, yes, in case anyone's curious, Suzanne is a relative. She is, in fact, my mother, which is very sweet of her to attend all of these online tours. I don't ask her to do it. She does it of her own free will. So, there you have it. All right, architecture. This one is a special request from some dear friends of ours, the Inch family. If you aren't familiar with Inch Farms, just outside of Tacoma on the Puyallup River Road area, they have the finest and most beautiful eggs in the area. So if you want the hookup, you let me know. Other than that, let's dive into this. I do want to take a moment before I start spewing nonsense about the architects of Tacoma to thank the true historians here in the city of Tacoma. Historic Tacoma, aptly named. I find that they are the most well-researched and passionate historic group in the city. Like I said, the name kind of says it all. And in fact, we have the distinct pleasure of working with them this coming Sunday, the 17th, in leading a tour of the Proctor neighborhood here in Tacoma. So we get to talk about a few of those buildings that are eligible for historic preservation and sort of just help promote the historic knowledge in the area. So I'm pretty stoked on that. And their research on the architects of Tacoma is unparalleled. So if you guys want any follow-up links, you want to do your own digging, I can direct you to them. But yeah, Historic Tacoma, Google them. It's difficult to miss with some SEO like that. Also, tonight's tour is brought to you by the delectable flavor of Author Draft Mead, which this is new to me, but it's a carbonated on-draft mead out of Vancouver, Washington. Absolutely bananas, but it's delicious, and I'm gonna drink it. Okay, I think that's all the. Oh, I'm just going to keep you on the hook for a little while longer because I do want to take this opportunity to mention two things. Number one, as always, if you enjoy your tour tonight and my desperate attempts to make sense of architecture in Tacoma, then you can show that appreciation by clicking on our PayPal link on prettygrittytours.com. Right on the homepage, we got a button. Also, we've got a swag store. If you go to prettygrittytours.com, we have a store. We sell cool merch now. And it's something I was reticent to ever do, but people kept asking, very specifically looking at you, Grant Panic. So thank you guys for pushing us to take the extra step. Some of it I think is pretty cool. So if you guys are interested in any t-shirts, magnets, or hoodies, now is the time. Without further ado, let's talk a little bit about the architects of Tacoma. And this was a tricky one for me because when someone first pitched this, I sort of struggled to do, are we going to talk about the architects of Tacoma or the architecture of Tacoma? Because really, they're two very different tours. There's some phenomenal architecture in the city. For example, Union Station. And Union Station, completed in 1911, was the second main train station for the city of Tacoma. It is currently a federal courthouse. And I don't want to get too much into this, but essentially it gets abandoned because the train stops running regularly through there. It gets purchased by the federal government, revitalized in a last-ditch effort to bring some of that historic fabric back to the city of Tacoma, and is now a federal courthouse right downtown, and thank goodness that it is. But this particular building is a design of Reed and Stem. You might know them. They're the same guys who did Grand Central Terminal in New York. And while it is an iconic part of the Tacoma skyline and an important architectural paragraph in the narrative of Tacoma, it really doesn't have a place in an Architects of Tacoma tour because they're not Tacoma architects. They didn't stick around. They got the hell out of Dodge once they were done. So we're skipping over that stuff. We're talking about the men and women who not only contributed something to the fabric of this city, but loved it so much that they stuck around. So that's my benchmark for who's making it on the tour. And if you don't like it, that's just too bad. But also tell me in the comments because I'll probably be really nervous about it and try and fix it later. Let's talk about our first guy. Scotsman, Ambrose J. Russell. Now, Mr. Russell is, by all accounts, and I think I'm historically accurate when I say this, a badass. He was born in India in 1857 to just some hard-working missionary types out in India under the rule of the empire. And they, when he was 5 years old, went back to Scotland. And I call him the maestro. I gave all our people nicknames tonight. He's the maestro because he is the most classically trained of our architects we're going to talk about tonight. Like, he got his education at Glasgow University. From there, he went on to the École Beaux-Arts. I believe. He was the dude who was reading in Latin, learning all of the Greek and Roman architectural styles, and he brought that knowledge back and really became the first famous architect of European descent on the West Coast. Like, if we had indigenous architects that we talked about more vocally, they would have beat him. But Ambrose Russell is really the guy who brings this story to the West Coast. And remarkably, Tacoma was a big favorite of his, and we have a lot of his buildings. So you may be familiar with the theater right here. Landmark Convention Center. I think the most famous for me is the William Rust Mansion. The first one, not the second one. And that's the one that's pictured right here. Also, the governor's house down in Olympia, the official governor home for Washington, so where Jay Inslee currently resides, that is another Ambrose Russell design. So he's a pretty pretty big deal. This is the Perkins Building, downtown Tacoma. Just on the left hand of this photograph, you would normally see the 11th Street Bridge that descends into the Port of Tacoma. Not pictured there because it wasn't built yet. Also, quite possibly the largest American flag I've ever seen. For those of you from or in Tacoma, you might be familiar with the enormous American flag that flies on the dealership at the bend of Highway 16. I'm pretty sure, though I haven't confirmed, that this one pictured here on the Perkins Building in the early 1900s is in fact bigger, but don't quote me on that. Also, this modest little home in North Tacoma is another Ambrose Russell design, so that you can see he wasn't one for flash, I wouldn't say. I think he was a very just solid architect that really delighted in the beauty of the details. This is the first church up in, not the first church ever built, but I believe First Presbyterian up in Seattle, and just sort of represents the fact that he was all over the place. He wasn't just Tacoma. Is it? Oh, thank you. See, I always rely on Faye. Thank you. Yeah, Tacoma Screw has that enormous flag, and it's large. But it is worth pointing out that Mr. Russell did finally choose to be buried here in Tacoma, and he worked until the very last day. I think he died at 89 years old, and he was still in the office. I believe in the office is the story that I've heard, but not confirmed, when he eventually passed. So this is a hardworking, classically trained man who really set the tempo for architecture in Tacoma and propelled so many of the greats here. And I started with him for that reason, but also because he was directly influential on who I personally consider to be the most famous architect in the city of Tacoma. Anyone want to? It's just the cat, don't worry. There's no jump scares tonight. Aries, everyone's been waiting for you. It's very good to see you. It's not Aries. He's not the most famous architect of anything. Don't you worry about it. That's right, Mr. Frederick Heath. Now, Frederick Heath was, by all accounts, influenced greatly by Ambrose Russell because they were buddies and they were partners for a period of time. After Ambrose really established himself here in Tacoma, Frederick Heath arrived on the scene quite late in that game, and they became partners and they developed a few projects together. And a lot of the accounts say that Heath was particularly in love with one of Ambrose's more famous designs, and it's Emmanuel Presbyterian, which is the only Spanish mission-style church in the city of Tacoma, or I believe surrounding area. And just in case you haven't seen enough of it, we do still have some aerial footage of it, because it's honestly one of my favorites as well, and I think really represents the Russell je ne sais quoi, where it's traditional, it's elegant, it's designed to be inclusive of a great deal of space, and it really was supposed to elevate Tacoma. He wanted to design buildings that would make this the grandest city on the West Coast, which it had every intention of doing. So there you go. Frederick Heath, however, shows up later. He was born in 1861 in the Midwest, and then eventually he comes out to the Tacoma area for health reasons. While I've never been able to track down what specifically those were, it could be a multitude of things, but anyone who's been to the East Coast, Midwest knows that high humidity, cold winter is brutal, and Tacoma is, by comparison, a lovely place to ride out those winters. So if you have health concerns, come on down. And many people did at the time, including Heath. When Frederick got here with his wife, they pretty quickly had 2 sons and sort of really set down roots in the area. And I think so many of the buildings that are really definitive of Tacoma, that have really withstood the test of time, are Frederick Heath's. And let's take a look. So this is our boy right here. He's one of the few architects that had photographs of them. I have looked for ages to find a photo of Ambrose Russell, and I don't know if it's a personal preference or his Scottish heritage or what, but he refused to have any pictures done. And if someone has them, for example, Patricia, if your friend Malcolm has any family photos of Ambrose, I would love to at least see one. So McKinley School is a Frederick Heath design. This is over in East Tacoma and is pretty representative of what he tried to do. A lot of educational facilities are under the Frederick Heath name, including, but not limited to, Jesus Christ Church of the Scientist over here. The Pythian Temple, which if you're not familiar with, once you're in the know, you'll know. The Pythian Temple is the oldest fraternal organization in the city of Tacoma. They have this beautiful building on the inside. The outside is pretty unassuming. It's right down across from Theater on the Square on Broadway. And if you see it, you would glance right past it. But once you're inside it, it is stunning. And this is a secret society. The Fraternal Order of Pythias, the Knights, as it were, are a secret organization. But if you have any questions, Steve Dunkelberger will be happy to answer them. I can't confirm that he's a knight, but he's a Knight of Pythia. So yeah, McKinley School, general stores downtown, and also Paradise Inn up on Mount Rainier. This beauty is a Frederick Heath design. So a lot of the really iconic parts of the Pacific Northwest, and specifically Tacoma, are Frederick Heath designs. But I think the most famous is actually one that he didn't design, but completed. Stadium High School. So for any of you who have been on our Stadium High School tour, who have seen the building, it is gorgeous. And Frederick Heath gets the glory for this bad boy. It was originally designed to be a luxury hotel for the Northern Pacific Railroad. They ran out of money during a cattle famine that bankrupted the entire nation, more or less. And so the building lays empty for a while. A mysterious fire guts a portion of it, and then the Northern Pacific Railroad cuts their losses and sells it. And they sell it to the Tacoma School District for basically nothing. And the school district brings on Frederick Heath to complete the design. But the true glory of Frederick Heath and what really set him, and in a lot of ways this school, into the record books isn't the building at all. It's what's next door. The stadium. Now, the stadium was originally designed on paper to have a seating capacity of 32,000 people, approximately. I think the largest unconfirmed but very well guessed record is 64,000 people in attendance for a civic event. And it was everything. It was the outdoor amphitheater for Tacoma. It was basically the Tacoma Dome before the dome. They've landed an Apache helicopter in it. They've used it for all sorts of civic events, political rallies. Theodore Roosevelt rode in a car at the bottom of it. They've had rodeos, military pageants, a reenactment of the fall of Carthage. They've done a lot in this Stadium Bowl. And before all that, it was just an abandoned piece of land called Old Woman's Gulch, where it was a gulch full of old women. More on that story later. And when the school district brought Frederick on, he was like, we could do something with this. And thus they did. And his most brilliant architectural design, in my opinion, is the seating. He designed a concrete seat that now fills the Stadium Bowl that was sturdy enough that you could put, 60,000 people in it, for example, but light enough that it wouldn't crush itself under its own weight, and they could build it into the side of that gulch, which is brilliant. This is it right there, under the shadow of what was at the time the Ferry Museum now the Washington State Historical Archives. And here is a pretty representative picture of just how grand the events were in the stadium. But here's the fun part. This is a little known fact. When Frederick Heath drafted the plans the first time to sort of make this the greatest place on the West Coast, he originally intended for the stadium to be an enclosed amphitheater. So here is a artistic rendering of what it was supposed to look like. That is a glass dome with 3 domed towers and then those massive rosette windows. It was a big deal, and shockingly enough, the city never went for it. There's some discrepancy in this story. Some people think that timing ran out. Some people are under the impression that the architecture might not have held, that the engineering of it wasn't sound. Most of us can confirm on our best gut feeling, though, that it was the price tag. It was just too expensive of a project, and they already had such a perfect spot right there that had this killer view of Commencement Bay. Why would you ruin that by bankrupting the city and the school district? Also, the stadium project in and of itself was basically a community-funded event. All of the people of Tacoma really put forth their own money to see that project happen, and so there was a lot of pride already invested in the project. The more you know. Now, Frederick Heath also gets to lay claim to Stadium's rival Lincoln High School, and I think Lincoln is where you really see the design imagination of Frederick Heath. He seems to have been very much into the more collegiate European feel, and I see that with McKinley, and I see it again in Lincoln, where he's trying to design these buildings that were reminiscent of higher education across the pond. So it's interesting that Stadium is his signature piece for so many people when the building itself wasn't his design so much as the project that he got handed and completed. A few more of his downtown. So it would be wrong of me to give all of the claim to Frederick Heath because he had partners throughout his whole game. Ambrose Russell, certainly the most prominent Tacoma architect for a long period of time. They were partners for a while. And then after a period of time, he gets another partner. So, I forgot my nickname. What was it? Oh, it's the father. We're calling, so you can take notes later. We're going to do another trivia night. If Ambrose Russell is the maestro, Frederick Heath is the father. So let's talk about the ambassador, George Gove. So George ends up becoming, later on, the partner of Frederick Heath. And together, they design Lincoln High School. And it's sort of hard to pull apart each other's influence. And even if you could, they were working on these projects together. But Lincoln High School is a joint effort between Gove and Heath. And then the Rialto and Urban Grace is a Gove heavy project, as well as the Tacoma Mausoleum. And the Tacoma Mausoleum, being a mausoleum, is one of the parts of Tacoma architecture that often gets overlooked and completely neglected in the storytelling aspect. And I always try and bring attention to it because it's sort of a very modern building for what it was, and has a very beautiful interior to it, with all of that white marble, the clean lines, and all of that glass trying to bring light in. I think the most famous, though, of these skylights that you get to see here is this one here. So the Rotunda skylight is actually a Tiffany's skylight. Something like 10,000 pieces of glass designed by Tiffany & Co. And then assembled by hand here in Tacoma to create that skylight there. And it is a signature piece of the city that almost nobody sees because there aren't a ton of visitors to the mausoleum. And quite frankly, those who do visit are usually being kept there for a long period of time because they have passed. 6th Ave Baptist is a Gove production, let's go ahead and say. And that's a fun building because it was built by the congregation. They just had a plethora of accomplished stonemasons, and then Gove took the project, designed it, and then together they created it. So 6th Ave Baptist with that Wilkinson sandstone is very representative of Tacoma. And look at that, a building with his name on it. Also, this building here, so this is a Masonic house. If any of you are familiar with the McMinimans Grand Lodge down just outside of McMinnville in Oregon, this is very similar. So Masons could have a place to live. They also would provide retirement possibilities for Masons, like to take care of their own. So this Masonic home is a Gove and somewhat Heath production. And this is just a little bit north of Tacoma, more towards Seattle. So there he is, George Gove in the flesh. Again, perhaps not the most flattering picture, but for whatever reason, architects just refuse to have their pictures taken, and so leaving this poor guy to go track them down anywhere I can. I believe that one is courtesy of the Historic Tacoma website, because they did some serious digging. I think they might have even got that one from a family member. Yikes. Okay, so just checking in on everyone here really quick. Seems like everyone's doing well. If you have any questions thus far, let me know, but I'm going to take you now to our next prominent architect, and I wanted to diversify the group. So we were going from the maestro, Ambrose Russell, to the father, Frederick Heath, to the ambassador, Mr. Gove. And I give him that title because the thing that made him most prominent as an architect in Tacoma was his civic contributions. He started a school. He was a big part of the Tacoma Society of Architects. In fact, the founding member of the Tacoma Society of Architects back in 1915. He established an architectural library. He would just teach courses because he loved architecture, and he felt that by diversifying and sharing that knowledge, the community would be richer. So he really brought architecture to prominence in Tacoma as an art form and as a viable profession. When you're talking about the Ambrose Russells and the Frederick Heaths of the world, both very active in their community, they sort of kept their gifts to themselves. And I think you see with George Gove the first time that he was like, let's break this box open and share that goodness with everyone because it deserves to be shared. So that's my ambassador. Now we're going to talk about the pioneer. So while we're talking about a lack of good pictures out in the world there, go ahead and meet Catherine Lockwood Squire. This is an artistic rendering of her. Again, photographs of her are incredibly hard to come by. And even more so than other architects, it's because she was really removed from a lot of her work. She is the shining example of a woman architect in Tacoma, and this was very, very early on. So she was born in 1854. She got to Tacoma, I believe, by like 1870, 1871. And she came out here with her second husband, number 2 of 3. Her first husband she married very early on in life and learned sort of the craft of architecture from him. He himself was an architect. She got really interested in it and actually is, unconfirmed, the architect who designed a lot of his projects, but his name is on it instead of hers. That first marriage lasts about 2 years, and she strikes out on her own. She studies with an uncle for a period of time. She learns drafting, and then she starts getting commissions of her own. So by the time she marries her second husband, they end up moving to Tacoma, and he gets a job pretty much straight away working with the city of Tacoma, doing Tacoma Buildings and Savings Association. And she just starts doing drafting for the company and sort of takes on projects where they're like, this project needs to be cleaned up. We need someone to do it. And she would not only make it right, but make it better. And she got pretty famous within the firm for this, to the point where she was starting to get people requesting her to do their homes. So the great majority of her buildings that we've been able to see were residential designs of architecture here in Tacoma. Now, Ms. Squire goes on to design approximately 28 homes that we know of in Tacoma, but of all of them that she designed, only one of them exists today. And to the best of my investigation, this is just because, as a woman architect, no one really appreciated the historic significance of what she had done until it was too late. And people were like, let's clear this bad boy out of here and put something new here. And it's just this one home that managed to survive throughout. And I've got a picture of it here. So this is in North Tacoma, and it is a gorgeous home. And it is a Catherine Lockwood Squire original. And in fact, the only one that still exists here in Tacoma today. These were taken off the MLS site for the home when it was up for sale. And it's just beautiful. It's got all these bay windows. You can see the giant solarium on the second floor there, which I think is the most striking feature and the one that I love the most about the home. And her name was Kathleen Lockwood Squire. Also, these peekaboo bookshelves designed inside the home, as well as the glass inlay on that small bar there on the left, are just beautiful and gorgeous features of this home. And so we're lucky to have an example of her work here. So her story is by far my favorite. It gets crazy from there. Her second husband starts to go have health problems of his own, so they move to California. And after moving to California, which essentially killed her architecture career here in Tacoma for always and always, right after they get into California, her husband dies. Didn't work. So she marries her third husband, and they became very active in sort of giving back to the community. And one of their major projects was trying to create sustainability in farming communities. So much so that they end up getting this small island off the coast of California and creating a farmers' commune out there and designing the buildings and then trying to create this place where these farmers could live. Little by little, each of them sort of drifts off on their own until it's just Kathleen and her husband who are left behind, living in a lighthouse on the island until eventually her husband dies and she alone is living in the lighthouse. And she sticks it out to the very end until eventually her loneliness consumed her words, and she comes back to the mainland and then passes a few years later in a mental institution, of all places. Because in the early 1900s, if you were sad and a woman, that was enough reason to commit you. So, little bit of history right there. It's tragic to me because everything I've ever seen of hers, everything that I've read about her, she was an intensely brilliant woman, an accomplished architect. And I'm going to put links to her work on our page later because she was responsible for some major projects, but her name will never be on them because she was doing the work for generally whoever she was married to at the time. So next time you're in North Tacoma, take a moment to appreciate the fact that we have one of the only known examples of Catherine Lockwood Squire's work. Pretty cool stuff. Also, pretty sad. So I'm going to try not to let you guys linger too long on that sad note. Let's talk about who have we done so far. The maestro. We've done the father. We've done the ambassador. We talked about the pioneer just now. Let's talk about the whiz kid. Alan C. Little. Now, everyone else that we've addressed thus far, was a transplant, someone whose heart called them to Tacoma. They arrived on the scene, beautified the city, left their mark, and then got out, usually when they died. That's how they checked out. But Alan Little here is born and raised Tacoma, graduated Stadium High School, and he got himself some awards for drafting and architecture, and everyone was like, wow, you're really smart. So then he goes on to the University of Washington. He does some more drafting. Everyone's like, wow, kid, you're really smart. Goes to Europe for a while, does some projects there, and everyone's like, wow, you're really good. So he comes back to Tacoma, and he starts playing around with architecture, and people love his stuff, so much so that he starts getting a lot of high-profile commissions. And the thing that really set him apart was that he really started to dig into this modern architecture. And he, boy howdy, was a big fan of plywood. So some of his most famous structures, this here is the Beach House. Beach House is located, I never remember. I'm gonna find out for you guys. It's in Washington State, as are the majority of the little projects. But you can see he's big in the lines, he's big in the plywood, and he really represents that like mid-century modern design aspect that we've come to love. And if you've seen a home that you're like, wow, that's sort of fancy and modern in Tacoma, more than likely it's an Alan Little product. He's born in 1922. He didn't actually pass until 2009. So as far as the architects that we're going to talk about tonight, he's by far the most contemporary. And you'll see a lot of his work around. So here we go. This one is in Tacoma as well. You can see it's got that clean line, modern Mad Men space house vibe to it. This one, you're pretty much guaranteed to have seen. If you've ever gone up 30th, leaving Old Town, then you've seen this home. And this is what it looks on the inside. Again, pulled these from the MLS page. Really just cool stuff that he does. And it's a vast departure from the architects that we've talked about before. I think the one that really set him on the map, though, by all accounts that I've read, is his Home of Living Light. And this was part of the Seattle Fair, or the World's Fair in Seattle. And you can see here, I've got a floor plan of it too. But this is a plywood home, really big into curvature and obviously light. So it had all of these different lights that would play in the scoops that came up from the top there. And then the home itself was sort of there's no right angles. Everything is a round curve, sort of honeycomb feel to it, even though there's tons of sharp angles in a honeycomb. A lily pad. I don't know. This is the Buell-Seaver home. And this is at actually 3635 South Whitman, or this would have been sort of more over by University Place in Tacoma. And I don't believe that it's there now. Is the audio still there? I'm double checking on you guys here. So yeah, the little homes, as we'll call them, are very representative of sort of that modern chic vibe. Huge departure from our other architects, but he also is credited for, where's my picture of it? This is the Marine Institute up for the University of Washington. And then, why can't I think of it? Charles Wright Academy is an Alan Little, I'm going to say production, but that's not true, design. So definitely one that is very well known in the area, but bears his name on it. So now, remember early on I was talking about, we can talk about the architecture of Tacoma and we can talk about the architects of Tacoma, but they're not always the same thing. I did want to address a couple things. Number one, I believe it was... See, now here's where I'm confused, because Heath, Gove, and Russell all worked on similar projects. So Whitworth University in Spokane is a design of one of those three. And they took it and built it after doing the first one here in Tacoma. For those of you who don't know, Whitworth was first located in Tacoma, in North Tacoma, across from the Weyerhaeuser mansion. And it was a project by Alan C. Mason, the grand patron of the city of Tacoma. And he had the first public library for the city, a massive mansion out there, and then helped establish Whitworth College before it was a university. And in fact, if you're out there now and you go away, like you're curving back towards Stevens from the Weyerhaeuser mansion, and you sort of go down the hill, you'll see just what's left. It looks like an abandoned shell of a building, because it is. And that is the original Whitworth College. It's just in somebody's private backyard right now. Worth looking at. You'll also notice the Alan C. Mason plinth of that first public library located out there as well. But the Alan C. Mason mansion gets bulldozed after he loses all of his money, buying back houses from people who went bankrupt. And then the Weyerhaeuser mansion gets built on top of it. And while it is an iconic piece of Tacoma architecture, it's not really a Tacoma architect. The Weyerhaeusers brought in some big shot East Coast architects to do it, and then actually had the Olmsted brothers, the same guys who did Central Park, do all of their landscaping. That said, despite my snarky attitude, it's a sweet building, and I found a video that a realtor did of inside the building. I would love to share it with you guys right now because it is worth seeing. So it fits into our architecture tour. I'm going to give you guys some clips of it, and then I'll see you in just a second. Uh-oh. Is it playing any audio? No, it doesn't seem that it is. All right, so I'm just going to narrate it, and you're going to be thankful that I did. So this is the Weyerhaeuser mansion. It was also affectionately termed Hadaway Hall, which is a funny joke that John Weyerhaeuser came up with because his wife basically told him that they were going to build this mansion and then made him bankroll it. So Hadaway Hall is a slurring of had her way. That's the most official story that I've heard. Basically, that's what you're missing on the audio right now, with a lot of my own embellishment. Right now, she's pointing out this. This is a secret liquor cabinet, so that when you were entering or exiting the room, you could get a little nip of something without your guests necessarily noticing before they entered or exited the room yourself. We're about to see my favorite part, though. So this drawing room, you'll notice in the back part there's an organ. It's a pipe organ mounted to the floor, and while you can sit there and play that organ, the pipes are directly beneath it in the basement, and those were the pipes located right there. Bananas. This is just your cash solarium when you're like, I would like a tea, and I'd really like to see the sun, but not feel the sun too much. It's raining. You all know how this goes. So that's their solarium out there. This is the kitchen, and it was very modern at the time, specifically because it has a silver safe. Because they had all their riches in hand-pressed silver, and you couldn't trust the servants. Literally what she says here in a second. This cabinet opens up to their massive silver safe. And no joke, my great aunt still has a silver safe embedded in her concrete wall. This is real life, my friends. This is the original washer and dryer. And down here, okay, so for a period of time, this was a seminary building. And the nuns were living in the main hall. They built a seminary across from it. And so they painted their history on the walls inside the basement, which That's some old school stuff. A visual history of your people painted in the basement. They just don't make mansions the way that they used to. So yeah, that's Hadaway Hall. If anyone is interested, I believe it is currently privately owned. And if you want to beat their offer, I think it sold for just about $5.5 million. So I'm not saying you're going to have any luck, but you should at least know what you're getting into. If you're like, I must have that solarium. I get you. We all want one. Let me make sure that I've got my boys here. We're getting to the point where I want to talk just briefly about some of the names that don't get spoken of too much. And so Frederick Heath and George Gove are like, I mean, what? They're the father and the ambassador. They're the hot shots of Tacoma architecture at the time when the city was really embracing it. But they had a third partner, an employee named Herbert Bell. And for a while there, the firm was Heath, Gove, and Bell. But Bell almost never gets mentioned. You'll never see a picture of him. He's buried here in Tacoma. He was responsible for a lot of their big projects alongside them. But as an employee of humble origins, he rarely gets a lot of victory in the history books. So I would like to show you a picture of him, because here at Pretty Gritty, we represent the little guy too. So here he is with his wife, who later truncated to, I think, Elise, if I'm not mistaken, but I'll have to double check on that. So here he is. He's a fun-looking dude, Mr. Herbert Bell. I love him. That's really all you need to know about that. Also, while we're talking about architects that are deeply influential to the city but don't necessarily make the wall of fame as often as they should, the Shaw brothers, Frederick and Stanley, who arrived in Tacoma in the early 1900s and then sort of set up shop with their own enterprise, are responsible for a lot of the gorgeous buildings here, but a lot of the ones that don't necessarily get credit. So here's one of the Shaw brothers. Here they are together at their drafting table in early Tacoma. And I think their most iconic building, in my opinion, is right there on 6th Avenue, the Shaw building, interestingly enough. And it was designed for the Knights of Columbus, I believe. So they had their meeting lodge up on top there. It has a beautiful ballroom. And then this used to be Northwest Costume, but it has now been purchased by, I believe, a physical therapy firm. We just spoke to them recently, who are taking over the building, and they're doing an incredible job of preserving the historic structure of it. Here it is aging throughout time, and you can see that the bottom level was always designed to be retail, so the Shaw brothers were intent on creating those deep window bays so that each individual shop could showcase their goods to the people walking down 6th Avenue, which, if you've been on our 6th Ave tour, you know, was the ritzy shopping district of Tacoma. Very high class, and in a way, still is. The last one that I wanted to at least give a nod to really quick, I have left them off of my list. Is Roland Borick. And Roland Borick is another one of the sort of original cast of architects that arrived to Tacoma, and he has an incredible collection of buildings. Most prominently, though, is probably the Rialto. This is a Roland Borick design. It's one of the enduring parts of the Tacoma cityscape, and we're lucky to have it. But this is the Walker apartment building, and for me, this is really where you see his work shine. A lot of people pass by this one, not realizing what it is, and only really go in it if they live there or they're there for Red Star Taco. Both are good reasons. But it was a huge advancement for apartments in Tacoma when it was built in the early 1900s, because it was designed to be 7 floors, which was pretty extraordinary. It has an L shape, which you can't see from the exterior there, but it's designed to sort of half hug an exterior courtyard. And it was the first apartment building in Washington State to have a stone exterior. When you're looking at it, it's really striking, but if you're not thinking about it, you kind of take it for granted. Take it for granite. That's a dad joke, and it doesn't even stick because this is actually sandstone from the Walker Quarry. But it's an exceptionally beautiful building, and one that I think people just walk past all the time. So that's a Roland Borick, and he doesn't get nearly enough credit as an architect in the city. So we call him the Forgotten. So let's go back through our guys really quick, just so that if later it's trivia, you remember. Ambrose Russell. Scottish-born national in India. We call him the maestro. Frederick Heath, the father, the guy who completed Stadium High School, but most importantly, did the Stadium Bowl. George Gove, the ambassador, the man who partnered with Frederick Heath, who really brought the craft of architecture to a willing and worthwhile audience. Kate, Lockwood Squire, the pioneer, the only example of an early woman architect in the city of Tacoma, and we still have one of her homes around. Alan C. Little, the whiz kid, just gifted from a very early age, took his craft and deep, passionate love of his hometown Tacoma and modernized it with a ton of plywood. And, of course, our forgotten man, Roland Borick. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope to have given you at least a little bit of the backstory on the people that helped design these buildings here in Tacoma, because we talk about the architecture or what has happened in the building all the time, but very rarely do we actually give a nod to the people who conjured it in their minds to give us a space to live history. So with that, my name is Chris Staudinger. I was your guide for the evening. If you've enjoyed your experience, please feel free to tip on our PayPal, prettygrittytours.com. I appreciate all of your generous support, both financial and emotional, probably emotional more. And I look forward to seeing you guys soon, which, on that note, tomorrow night, we're going to do cool stuff in Tacoma. It is a Paul tour that I will be joining him with. And our new friend, Quabi, who runs the Peace Bus, is going to be joining us to sort of just talk about our favorite things here in Tacoma. And then Saturday, we are going to do a newly updated virtual tour of Tacoma's underground. So look for it. It's going to be good. And I believe next week we're going to do our third round of ghost tours. So I hope you're excited. It's going to be all the same stuff of terrifying, grotesque murders and unexplained mysteries here in T-Town. Some of my favorites. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much. We're going to see you guys soon. Please join us tomorrow night, and I will see you then. Thank you. Be safe out there. Keep on exploring.